Good afternoon. It's Saturday, the 27th of June. I'm Erin Viner, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has reacted to Friday's wave of horrific Islamic terrorism on 3 continents, saying that the attacks demonstrate that the world is locked in a struggle against dark forces. At least 65 people were killed by terrorists in France, Tunisia, and Kuwait in attacks for which responsibility has been claimed by the Islamic State. The extremist Sunni group has been urging its worldwide followers to make the Muslim holiday of Ramadan a month of calamity for non-believers as part of commemoration for the first anniversary of its founding. Prime Minister Netanyahu called for greater unity to combat the murderous terrorism of extremist Islam, starting with unequivocal international condemnation of the brutal killings and those who support the murderers. Leaders around the world are joining the Prime Minister in voicing outrage over the attacks while also expressing their determination to confront the threat.
The Secretary-General affirms that far from weakening the international community's resolve to fight the scourge of terrorism, these heinous attacks will only strengthen the commitment of the United Nations to help defeat those bent on murder, destruction, and the annihilation of human development and culture.
We've got to do all we can to help. That means cooperating on counter-terrorism, building our capacity on counter-terrorism. It means dealing with the threat at source, whether that is ISIL in Syria and Iraq or whether it is other extremist groups around the world. And we also have to deal, perhaps more important than anything, is with this poisonous, radical narrative that is turning so many young minds, and we have to combat it with everything that we have. The people who do these things, they sometimes claim they do it in the name of Islam. They don't. Islam is a religion of peace. They do it in the name of a twisted and perverted ideology that we have to confront with everything that we have. And we must stop the poisoning of these young minds in our country, in other European countries, and around the world.
This illustrates, yet again, that as far as the Daesh death cult is concerned, it's coming after us. We may not always feel that we are at war with them, but they certainly think that they are at war with us.
The worst of the attacks was in Tunisia, where Sefeddine Yacoubi joked with mostly European sunbathers on the beach before retrieving a Kalashnikov rifle out of an umbrella and spraying gunfire at a Sousse resort, murdering at least 39 people and wounding 36 others. The 23-year-old aviation student then continued the shooting spree in the pool area of the Imperial Marhaba Hotel before moving inside, killing people as he went before ultimately being shot dead by police. The victims include British, German, and Belgian tourists. During a news conference at his office in the capital, Tunis, Prime Minister Habib Essid said that he has deployed army reservists into active service around the country and that he would immediately order the closure of about 80 mosques he said operate outside the control of the Ministry of Religious Affairs and are responsible for incitement. Meanwhile, a suicide bomber blew himself up at a Shiite mosque in Kuwait City after midday prayers, in the first such terror attack in the Gulf nation in more than 2 decades. At least 27 worshippers were killed and 227 others were wounded. The targeted Imam Sadiq is one of the oldest Shiite mosques in the predominantly Sunni nation, where about 15 to 30% of the population is believed to belong to the minority sector. Kuwaiti officials announced that several people have been arrested on suspicion of involvement in the attack and that security has been bolstered to protect oil production sites around the country. The gruesome day of horrors began in France, where a delivery man, once under surveillance for radical Islamic ties, deliberately crashed his truck into an American-owned chemical warehouse near Lyon after murdering and decapitating his boss and hanging the severed head on the factory gate with an Islamic flag. The suspect was apprehended soon after setting off the blast and has been identified as Yassine Salahi, who is a 35-year-old married father of 3, born to an Algerian father and a Moroccan mother. There are ongoing security raids to capture potential accomplices to the crime, and French Prime Minister Manuel Valls is warning citizens that, to his sorrow, more Islamist attacks can be expected, and it's not a matter of if, but when. Turning to Islamic State warfare in the region, and fighting is again raging between Kurdish forces and ISIS insurgents in the Syrian border town of Kobani, where 200 civilians, including women and children, have reportedly been killed by the extremist group since it's launched its latest offensive on Thursday. Kurdish forces are believed to have succeeded in driving ISIS out of the strategic town today, although clashes are reportedly continuing on its outskirts. And meanwhile, a suicide car bombing targeted a security building on Friday in the northeastern town of Hasaka, which came under a surprise attack by the Islamic State the previous day. According to reports, at least 20 government soldiers have been killed in those clashes. And Islamic terror also struck in Somalia yesterday when the al-Qaeda-linked al-Shabaab group attacked a remote African Union base in the village of Ligo, causing many casualties, with some reports saying as many as 25. The attack also began with a suicide car bombing, followed by an assault by multiple gunmen. Some reports say that during the attack, several women were beheaded. In other news, and with just 3 days to go until the self-imposed deadline to reach an Iranian nuclear deal, negotiations are in high gear. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif are now in Vienna holding marathon talks aimed at resolving the major outstanding differences. The most notable of the persisting gaps are over the sequencing of lifting economic sanctions against Tehran and the nature of the monitoring mechanisms to ensure that the hardline Islamic Republic will not violate any final pact. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is demanding that the punitive measures be lifted immediately after the signing of a deal, while the P5+1 diplomats insist that they be eased gradually according to a planned schedule, only after confirmation that Iran is honoring its commitment to curb nuclear development. Foreign ministers from France, Russia, China, Britain, and Germany will also take part in the talks in the last-ditch efforts to secure a deal by June 30th. The so-called Freedom Flotilla is today sailing toward the shores of Gaza, intent on breaching the naval blockade of the Hamas-run enclave. Organizers say that 4 out of the 5-boat convoy have successfully embarked from separate European ports and are expected to reach the waters off Gaza within the next few days. Activists aboard the vessel include Arab-Israeli Knesset member Basel Ghatas of the Joint Arab List, who insists that the mission is humanitarian and meant to raise awareness of the siege on the Strip. Yesh Atid leader Yair Lapid today rejected that claim, saying that it has nothing to do with goodwill, but is merely a provocation against the Jewish state carried out by people who are anything but defenders of human rights. The former finance minister made the remarks while speaking at a cultural event in Cologne, where he said that the flotilla is being led by those who support terror and should be stopped and arrested. Government officials are criticizing the Vatican for signing its first treaty with the State of Palestine yesterday, branding it as a hasty step that damages the prospects for advancing a peace agreement while harming the rights of the Jewish people. Sources at the Foreign Ministry say that the move could also have implications on future diplomatic relations between Jerusalem and the Vatican. The accord covers activities by the Catholic Church in the Palestinian territories and was agreed upon in principle last month. It is the first such pact since the Vatican recognized Palestinian as a state in 2013. Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki explained its significance while speaking at a news conference following the signing.
The agreement builds on the long-standing and special relations between the State of Palestine and the Holy See, with the new provisions related to the special status of Palestine as the birthplace of Christianity and its noble messages.
The United Nations Human Rights Council report on the Gaza conflict released this week is predictably slanted against Israel. That's the view of Washington's former U.S. ambassador and potential presidential candidate John Bolton, who told Arutz Sheva that Hamas is already rearming for the next war.
Well, this outcome, this report, I think was completely predictable. The UN Human Rights Council is no different from its predecessor, the discredited Human Rights Commission. The new council, 10 years old now roughly, has spent the overwhelming bulk of its time criticizing Israel. Even after the Obama administration had the U.S. Join the council, it's had no impact. All of that was predictable as well. So when the Human Rights Council decides it's going to investigate a conflict in which Israel is involved, you can write the report in advance. This is a a circumstance that happens again and again and again, and this is simply one more example of it. The fact is that the report ignores all of the many, many steps that Israel took, well in excess of the requirements of international law, to confine its activity to military objectives, to protect innocent civilian populations, to do everything it could to minimize collateral damage. The cause of the damage that did take place was the result of the Hamas strategy of concealing its military activities in civilian locales and using civilians as shields. You can go through this episode by episode that the report recounts, and there's simply no other explanation than that this is another example of the pervasive U.S. bias against Israel. Unfortunately, a familiar pattern. Israel is going to have to explain piece by piece what's wrong with this report, because you cannot allow the historical record to go unanswered, and to try again to explain to people who don't want to listen that Israel goes above and beyond the requirements, as it should, as the United States does. The fact is it's being attacked by a group of terrorists who have a radical ideology, who don't see a distinction between military and civilian activities, who routinely conceal what they do by using innocent civilians to cover their activities, which they're still doing today in Gaza with rocket storage, mortar facilities, and a whole range of other military capabilities to use against Israel at a later date. This is an unceasing burden that Israel has. It's unfair to say the least, but to ignore the reality would simply be to give Israel's enemies the advantage.
An American trade bill containing provisions opposed to the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign against Israel cleared its final legislative hurdle in Congress this week. The measure pertains to free trade talks between the U.S. and the European Union and requires American negotiators to make rejection of BDS a principal trade objective in transatlantic business and investment partnership. The bill's sponsors say that they hope that the guidelines will discourage European governments from participating in BDS activities by leveraging the incentive of free trade with the United States. The effort to fight BDS on American campuses was one of the important topics addressed during the annual meeting of the Jewish Agency's Board of Governors in Tel Aviv this week. Agency official Igal Palmore explained to IBA's Eli Wogelenter how his organization is helping to counter the Palestinian-led campaign.
The main challenge is to get people to be willing to go out, speak their mind, and fight for their opinions. Because many people, Jews or non-Jews on campus, do not want to let the BDS bullshit to be spread around and gain traction. They understand exactly how vicious this discourse really is. Many people understand that it's not just about Israeli policies, it's about Israel's very right to exist. And from there, it's about Jews and the Jewish condition in that country. And beyond that, it's about freedom of speech and freedom in general. So many people don't want to stand for this, but, you know, it's very intimidating. It's very intimidating to face a very organized, very determined, and very violent sometimes groups who march or make demands and claims supposedly on behalf of human rights, and it's very difficult to counter claims made or based, so-called, on human rights, especially when you're on campus. So people who don't feel they have a very strong network with them and behind them will not speak up their mind. And so the most difficult challenge is to create coalitions, to make people feel secure and you know, to trust their feelings and their opinions enough so that they can come out with them and actually act against the BDS campaigns.
Do you hear from students, they tell you that they're afraid to walk around on campus wearing their kippah because they feel so intimidated?
That depends on the campus, of course. I can't generalize. But yes, we have heard these kind of complaints. People are afraid. People are afraid to walk or to say things or to do things or to be identified with certain organizations or with Israel, even in general. People are intimidated. And you know what? This does not concern only Jews, even non-Jews who deep down feel that, Israel is basically right. Maybe, there are aspects of Israeli policy that could be criticized, just as they could be critical of American policies or European policies. Yeah, why not criticize Israel? But they feel that the BDS have taken this way beyond legitimate criticism, but they're afraid to speak their mind. They are, in some ways, a little bit like Marranos in Spain, who pretend to be Christian, who pretended to be Christian on the outside, but who used to light Shabbat candles downstairs where nobody saw. So we need to help them to come out with the Shabbat candles and with Kiddush and to be proud of who they are and what they stand for.
What specifically is the Jewish Agency doing to help them strengthen their feelings of Jewishness and support for Israel on campus?
Specifically, we send shlichim, we send delegates to campuses who work with local Hillel and who bring the Israeli perspective to the activities vis-à-vis Jewish students, first of all, those who are affiliated with Hillel, and hopefully beyond that, in circles that go beyond the affiliated members. These people are connected to Israel. They have information. They know what is going on. They can spread and disseminate information, facts, documents, and they can help organize activities not just around Israel knowledge and come and visit Israel and take part in Israel immersion programs, but also in countering all the BDS action, all the BDS initiatives on campus, not just with rallies or slogans, but with actual information and with actual, I would say, hardware and material that can help not just convince other students, but also convince university authorities.
Britain's Queen Elizabeth II concluded her 3-day state mission to Germany with a somber stop at the Bergen-Belsen Nazi concentration camp. The Queen and her husband, Prince Philip, met with Holocaust survivors as well as former British soldiers who were among those who liberated the camp in 1945. The royal couple have conducted 4 previous state visits to Germany, although this was the first time that they have ever visited a former Nazi camp. They were escorted by the memorial's director and paused at a special memorial for Anne Frank and her elder sister Margot, who both died at the site 70 years ago. Margot Frank was born in 1926, which is also Elizabeth's year of birth. After walking alone along a long path to a modern structure known as the House of Silence, set up as a place of reflection for visitors, the two then placed a wreath at a memorial for the camp's victims. Here at home, hundreds of Israelis visited the Ein Bouven Spring in the Binyamin region this weekend to participate in a hike honoring the memory of Danny Gonen, who was murdered near the site in a terror attack last Friday. Gonen's friend, Netanel Haddad, who was also injured in the shooting, spoke to those gathered. The two had just finished a visit to the area near the West Bank settlement of Dolev when their vehicle was flagged down by a Palestinian they believed was asking for assistance, but instead shot them at point-blank range before fleeing the scene. Security sources have yet to confirm claims of responsibility for the attack from a Hamas-affiliated terror faction named for the 2 terrorists who abducted and murdered 3 Israeli teenagers a year ago. Turning to the weather, and tonight we can expect hot, dry conditions, while we're likely to see a drop in temperatures tomorrow, accompanied by partly cloudy skies and possible drizzle to light rain in the north and center of the country. It's also going to be unseasonably cold in the mountains. Here's the forecast at home and abroad over the next 24 hours. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. We hope you'll join us again tomorrow when Laura Cornfield will be here to bring you the latest breaking news from Israel. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a great week and shalom from Jerusalem.